All right, a lot of exciting opportunities there. So we had a great WWLF event last night at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. I know we have some NASCAR fans out there. Any NASCAR fans out? Yeah, all right. I knew this would be self-selecting that you would be here for this because I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker who is, as you know, the managing director of information technology at NASCAR. Steve Worling heads the race's organization's entire IT operations. So we're going to hear about the applications of all that we do, and we've heard a lot about the networks, but he's going to talk about how he's taken NASCAR's popularity around the country and around the world, and he's the one who has a great deal to do with it because he's really made the technology engage with its fans. And more and more of that is taking place within mobile networks, and he'll talk about that on race day and throughout the year. Please welcome to the stage Steve Worling.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning. Just thank you, Jonathan. Thank you to the WIA org here for inviting me to come out, and looking forward to just to tell you guys a little bit about the NASCAR story. You know, definitely when you think about NASCAR, it's probably not anonymous about technology in particular, more obviously about racing. And how many fans have ever been to a NASCAR race? How many NASCAR fans will get out there? It's great to see a few folks in the audience. So, you know, a little bit about NASCAR, and then we'll get into a little bit of what we're doing with technology today and some of the challenges that we're struggling with technology in itself. But a little bit about NASCAR first. You know, we're the premier motorsports racing league here in the U.S. We actually have our 3 national series, but something a lot of folks don't know is a lot of the other little regional touring series, things like that we do all around the country. You know, we have one of the longest running schedules in sports. We start in February, and our season runs from February to November, and we run thousands of races a year. Our 3 national series here, our Monster Cup Energy series runs 38 events from February until November. So we literally start the season, and it's weekend. And then we're building an international really presence in what we're trying to do. Across the world itself, you know, take our reach more global than what we're doing. And with that, that's going to be more data and more infrastructure and different connectivity things that we'll have to really focus on as an organization. And as I said, regional series. And these regional series are really the grassroots. These are the core race fans that are out every weekend. They're the ones that love racing, they're passionate about it, and also they're helping to develop the national champions that we have every weekend. So our fan base, who we are, you know, we're about 80 million fans in total worldwide. You know, we're kind of the average age right now, 48, so it's very important as we talk about data to bring in new fans. How do we bring data to reach new fans and entice them in new ways that they're not doing today to really get them educated and understanding about our sport? But something else that's really interesting about this, the last 2 bullet points, it's about digital and it's about social engagement as well. So bringing better content to that younger fan, and how do we engage them digitally, and how do we bring them into a bigger social environment and ecosystem that we're trying to provide. So something that's really cool about our sport, our personalities. And the reason I threw this slide here is, you know, for the last couple of years, our chairman, CEO, Brian France, has been very heavily invested in innovation. So how do we really drive creativity? How do we leverage technology inside our sport? You know, you think about NASCAR racing, you know, we like to joke around, we're a bunch of guys that make left turns all day. But we're much more than that. We're a group that uses technology heavily in the design of our race cars, in the testing of our race cars. Some of the race teams these days, as we're trying to help control some of the costs within the sport, they have actually gone to building 4-post simulations in their race shops to where they can drive a race car in, roll it up on the 4 posts, and actually simulate a race. So their manufacturers will go do high-resolution scans of every bump, crack, you know, problems in the racetracks, bring that back, and then simulate their cars. That helps them set up for those race environments, the next races they're going to. But, you know, it's really interesting that we're focused on that. And then obviously we have great courage. We're driven, very stewarding in what our sport is and what our personalities in our sport mean. This is a neat slide I really like to show. As I talk about that digital and social engagement. You know, today we reach about 58 million fans on TV. We have about 213 million visits to our website, and that's growing every day. We have 3.1 billion impressions socially. So as you look across the social ecosystem, from our drivers, from some of the influence that we bring out to the racetrack every year, really trying to reach a very broad and large audience to help build our fan base. We like to say one of two, we're one of two every weekend. You know, once football season starts, it gets a little tougher for us, but in the U.S., we are probably the #2 sport on TV every weekend, going through the February to November timeframe. So as I talked about, you know, let's talk about this era of innovation for us. You know, it's a really neat time for some of the stuff that NASCAR is focusing on, and really bringing a lot of innovation to the racetrack. And a lot of that starts with what we have to do from the race car, to how we get data around the track itself, to then getting data out of the racetrack, and how we bring it eventually to our fans on their devices, on TV, throughout all of the different ways we interact with sports every day. But some of the neat things, but actually before we do that, let me show you, this is a neat slide for us. This is our command center in NASCAR every weekend. So every weekend, what you see here, we actually pick up and move around with us. So for NASCAR, we're a very mobile sport. We don't own racetracks. So everything that we bring in to operate our sport, NASCAR brings that with us every weekend. So picture that. We pick up miles of fiber, we pick up miles of infrastructure, we pick up thousands of devices, people, and we move them around every weekend. We actually joke around internally that we're literally picking up an office building and we're moving it to the next racetrack. We're getting there on Monday, Tuesday, we're setting it up. We're testing everything Wednesday, we're putting it to use Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, turning it off Saturday night, Sunday night, and then we're putting it back on a semi-truck and driving it to the next location. Some of that is driving from Daytona Beach all the way over to Phoenix, Arizona in 2 days to host our next event. So this command center here, this is really the kind of the hub during the weekend. So anytime there's a car on track, this room, like you see here, is outfitted with folks looking at pertinent data to help us officiate our race. They're looking at timing and scoring data. They're looking at weather data, because we're a sport that doesn't race in the rain, unfortunately. They're looking at inspection data, so we know that all the cars have gone through inspection to make sure that they've passed and are set and ready to race. So this is really the hub of our kind of command center every weekend that goes on. Excuse me. So as I talked about, we move data centers worth of equipment around every weekend. So we have 2 data centers that follow our Monster Cup series. These are data centers that we host about 75 servers in. We host hundreds of workstations. It's our core network, and we actually have now gig internet to every racetrack. And for us, like, we get excited about this, because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we went from 9 megs of internet to 1 gig, which was impressive for us. That actually has now changed the way we do business and what we've been able to do. Actually, this year, we added now 2 10 gig connections, and now we're starting to look at how we change our video model. Right now, we use satellite a lot to move video back and forth for our broadcasters, our .com folks. We're actually starting to transition that now onto more fiber-based infrastructure. So a very neat kind of shift in how we operate our business every day, really happening right now. We also do something, just because we didn't think it was fun enough to actually move, you know, a whole infrastructure office platform around every weekend, but our race teams also are somewhat like we are. They're independent to the racetracks. They're not owned by racetracks like you see in stick and ball sports, like football. You know, the stadium typically is associated with the team itself and their house. So like the Panthers here, the Panthers home stadium is here in Charlotte. That's what they're associated with. Our drivers, our teams are not associated or affiliated with the racetracks either. So everything a race team brings to an event every weekend is something they have to bring on their own. So they drive a semi-hauler up. They have their race cars in it. They have all their tools, but they also unload a ton of infrastructure as well. And in the past, they were standing up wireless networks. And what they're trying to do is picture kind of this garage area that you've got 40 semi-haulers parked in. They're all parked 2 feet apart. Right behind them is a garage area that they are working race cars during qualifying and practice times, getting the cars ready for racing. And then eventually to pit road during the race itself, where they're putting their what we call war wagons. This is their command center, during the race where they are, again, trying to move all this data around about their race car. So they're getting our timing and scoring data. They're running other kind of scenarios in the car to know when to do fuel stops and tire stops, and a wealth of kind of information that their crew chief is trying to figure out the best strategy for their car. And so they were standing up all of these wireless infrastructure. So we always joked around that you could walk into a NASCAR garage and probably see the worst RF environment on the face of the planet. So you'd walk in, you'd take an analyzer out, and you'd see 400 or 500 wireless networks at any one given time. Just crazy. No one could do anything. And the only way they were getting ahead, turning the power up, doing other things they probably shouldn't be doing, whatever they could do to get that competitive advantage. And so about 2 years ago, we said, listen, we got to find a way to solve this for our cup teams. You know, they're spending a lot of money to be here, to be competitive. What can we do now that we have better internet into the facilities to help provide them better connectivity? So we actually install a cable modem platform every weekend now. So one of the components that drive around in our truck is a cable modem head end. One of these units are designed to support a neighborhood. So probably if you have cable modem at home, it's probably running the same platform we're running here to support 90,000 modems. We're putting out 300 modems on it. And this is unique for us because now we can sell internet packages to the teams. So that helps them do communications back to their home offices here in Charlotte. It also gives them the ability now to turn all that wireless noise off and move data around those three key areas, which is important for them. So when they're qualifying or practicing, they're always downloading data from the race car. They're sending it back to their hauler, and then eventually they're sending it all the way back to North Carolina so that some really smart engineers can say, hey, you need to turn this screw, you know, a half a millimeter more, and you'll get an extra couple of horsepower out of the car. And that's all they're trying to do. Our limits are so tight that they're just trying to find an extra couple miles an hour. So we lay out a lot of infrastructure every weekend to help support what we do for our racing environment. A couple other things that we've been working on, you know, we talk about data in how we're driving innovation. This is a neat story that we just like to talk about. You know, for 65 years, we used to inspect the car very manually. We had a lot of tools, had a lot of gauges, and a lot of things that help us inspect the car. And every car, how NASCAR works is, every car starts exactly the same weight, full of fuel, with the same tolerances. We give the teams a little bit of room to play in, but it's a very small margin of what they're allowed to do. So we really try to inspect that and make it a very driver sport versus making it a very kind of ramped up, cheated sport and how they can do with a race car. So every weekend, prior to about 2 years ago, we take the car off the hauler beginning of the day, and they have to go through all these inspections, about 250 different disciplines of inspection. And there was a piece of paper that followed the car around. Yes, a piece of paper that followed the car around to collect data on the inspection. And so you'd go through about 7 stations, and we'd check off, yep, you passed. We probably thought this day and age it's a little inefficient, as well as we're not getting any data out of it. All of these reports are just going into a box, and our best line of defense is the guy who shows up every weekend as part of our official who might remember what happened the weekend before. So, you know, we had a lot of challenges in that. So working with some partners like Microsoft, we ended up developing a mobile inspection app. And so we were able to go in now and digitize that piece of paper. And as the cars come through these disciplines now, they actually record digitally everything that goes on. And this is a few things now that makes our sport this much better. So we can capture real time exactly where the car's at in the inspection process. So our series directors now know, you know, if a car is not making it through inspection, why. He doesn't have to make radio calls, you know, call the officials that are standing out in those spaces. He's able to see real time with this app now exactly what's going on with our inspection process. Excuse me. The other thing that is giving us a lot of information on is ability to go back and look at history now, history that we've never had in the past. As I talked about, that paper would just go in the box. Excuse me. That paper would just go in the box, and we never have any more insight to it. So now we can go back and we can look at history. So if we have a car repeatedly going through inspection that's not passing, why is that? How do we get data now to understand that? In the past, it was always that official that had to be there every weekend to know that. Now we have an application that helps us do that. The other thing we talk about data that's really important in our sport, especially when it comes to managing the event itself. Go back to that picture I showed you. Those guys during the race are looking at all of this different data sets that are trying to make real-time calls on whether a crash is happening, a car is having a problem, where are we at in the race, all of this data that we have to look at. So this is an app now that we're starting to write that really helps us collectively bring all this data together. Now, something I didn't talk about was the infrastructure. As I said, we lay out miles of fiber every weekend as well to help us collect all this data. So everything that we go into is really leveraged around this infrastructure and what it takes to help give us great results and great feedback on what's going on with our sport. The other thing is we're working on how we get better data out of the car. So today, as I said, data is important. We use a lot of it for the timing and scoring, but we're now just starting to touch the surface on getting data out of the car. So every Cup car now has an ECU, a computer in it, that really manages the engine and what's going on. So how do we learn what is going on? How do we get more accurate with the GPS data that comes out of the car so we know where the car's at more accurately around the racetrack? So those are new things that we're working on, and really what it all comes down to is this really great slide I like to show, because this is something that really paints a great picture of the challenges we have today. So we show up at a racetrack today, and these are kind of based on our national series tracks. Most of the time these tracks are just kind of sitting here, not in use, have very limited infrastructure because in a lot of cases, we only show up and use these tracks once or twice a year. So the tracks themselves sit idle for most of the time, so it's tough for them to make large investments. They're starting to get and understand that, but most of the time you show up and it's just a track that looks like this, a blank canvas. We roll in and we lay out miles of fiber. Some tracks now are starting to invest in fiber, but we all understand that fiber is very key in any network you need, moving data around and how you do things. So our productions group in some cases will show up and they'll lay 10,000, 20,000 feet of fiber to help connect to our scoring platforms, to help connect to our CMTS systems, to help connect our haulers, our command center, all of that. But then what's interesting is now you'll start to see all of this infrastructure that starts to layer on top of it. So we put out a platform called MyLaps. This is what we use to do our official timing and scoring with. And so this is what, when you're watching on TV, you're watching on the digital platforms and you're seeing the leaderboard, who's in first through 40th place. It's all the data coming from this platform itself. Then what happens is our partners show up and they say, hey, we want to get video out of the car. So they lay out a network, or we want to get data out of the car. So they lay out a separate network. And this is where the RF really starts to get interesting for us. So they come in and they put their own RF network up because they have a partner that we did a partnership with 10 years ago, and this is the way they've been doing business. And that gets data out of the car for entertainment purposes, for TV, for digital, things like that. So they lay in their network. The video guys show up, and the video guys say, hey, we're going to put a network in so that we can get video out of the car. So now here's a whole nother network that gets laid out at the infrastructure and at the track every weekend. Now some tracks are starting to do distributed antenna systems. And so now we have more RF going into the environment that has to be coordinated on, has to be managed on. And something else is we were building this slide that I completely left off is Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi, as I talked about, the teams themselves all bringing Wi-Fi in. We still have a lot of teams today that we don't have the cable modem going to, so they're still leveraging Wi-Fi in other ways. The tracks themselves are dabbling in Wi-Fi and trying to move data around and help support their fans and create a better fan experience. The fans. So we have thousands of fans that show up every weekend in RVs and campers because this is their vacation for the year. They're starting to bring more RF noise and Wi-Fi into the facility. Our sponsors, our partners that are trying to create a better fan experience, bring more Wi-Fi into the venue. So when you look at this RF environment, it really is a very challenging mix of Wi-Fi noise, infrastructure that goes in that we have to support in how our industry works. So we've been working over the last probably year or two and really trying to change that and really get it to almost a collapsed model. One, going back to our partners and some of the vendors that do stuff today and saying, hey, how can we put one network in the car to really kind of collapse and do better data, get more data out of the car. The challenges we have with the vendors we have is they've reached capacity in the space they have available. So how do we go and look at some of the new technologies that everybody's talking about today, 5G, 3.5 and the CBRS bands. How do we put that in to help us open the pipes up? But how do we do it in a way that NASCAR controls a little better so that we can help manage it, put priorities on it, governance around what it does. How do we also still help the track still do new technologies? At the end of the day, it's about how we get great data out of the car, but also how do we create a great fan experience, both for you at the racetrack and away from the racetrack. So you might come to a race with this great venue technology in the future, and you might be able to get one kind of interaction, so maybe VR stuff, some different things that you can only do at a racetrack, versus when you're at home, you might get a different interaction with the data coming out of the car, more data to the devices and the things that are over there. So for us, we're really focused on now, how do we go in and leverage new emerging technologies to help really kind of solidify and make our racing that much better. So that was all I had. I, again, appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to come tell the story a little bit. Thank you.